cloud. Okay, cool. All right. Well, welcome to CocoaHeads. It's good to see everyone again, see some familiar faces, and exciting to see people we haven't seen for a while, and also new people as well. That's super exciting. We've been up to a lot while we've been away, and so we'll talk a bit about that. But first, we're going to talk about those new organizers. So you might have noticed there's a few of us with different CocoaHeads backgrounds. And we also have our secret announcement that we've been teasing for a little while. And then, of course, Ryan, who is our resident expert tonight, he's doing a SwiftUI demo, and then we'll have a short intermission, and then more demo, because you can't have too much of a good thing. You can, but whatever.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We will learn that by the end of the night.
Thanks for responding to my joke. That's the first flat joke of the night. Cool. All right. So, new organizers. So, very happy to announce that Simon, James, and Ryan are coming online as organizers. And so, they all... so Simon and James are professional iOS developers full-time, and Ryan does iOS development as part of his job. And so... it's great to have more input from people who are doing this full time, and to see more perspectives from large companies and small companies and everything in between. Cool. So our super secret announcement. So in the beginning there was Coco and Coco Touch, and it made sense to have something called CocoaHeads. But now that's not so much the case. We've got kind of UI kit and app kit, and also watch kit, and also UI kit on Apple TV, all sorts of craziness. And people just don't know what Coco is anymore. It's fallen out of Apple's own marketing stuff, out of their development documentation. You really have to find it. And new developers just have no idea what you're talking about if you say CocoaHeads. So... we also have a problem where whenever we try and say what we're about, we have to have every Apple framework underneath the sun, which that's not fun. And it makes it hard even for searchability, for people to find us and to know what we're about. So like, oh, we do all the things, but it's really not that many things, trust us. Because in the end, we're just a local meetup. We build stuff for Apple platforms, and what we care about is making great apps. And so it'd be great if we could communicate that a bit easier. So, introducing Brisbane.swift. Whoa! Oh, yeah. Everyone's got their notes up. I can't
out of date, Javen. Come on.
It'll work until they change languages again. Okay, cool.
It needs a break. I'll keep going and then do it later. So we think it's a good time to make this change because Swift has well and truly arrived. We're doing SwiftUI. It's iOS 14. Looks like we're actually going to be able to use that in production. We're going to get rid of the platform and framework soup because we can just say, hey, look, we're a Swift meetup. It makes a lot more sense. And also it means that we can be a bit more opinionated. And so we can leave Xamarin and Cordova and Flutter to the Brisbane mobile app development meetup. And we can focus on, again, doing what we really love doing, which is building great apps in Swift, because as we all know, the best apps are native Swift. So this is it, Brisbane Swift. So going forward, we'll change some things on the internet and we'll kind of run under this banner. But we're super excited about this. We think it's going to make it a lot easier to get people involved, and it makes a lot more sense so people that haven't heard about us but are wanting to get into iOS development. And instead of being a weird pixelated cup with a face on it, we get this cool logo too. So it's wins all around. Oh,
I like it. It looks sweet. Nice work, Javen.
Thank you.
Is there, because there are other chapters of CocoaHeads elsewhere in Australia, is this a group thing or is this just Brisbane?
Yeah, there's no affiliation between CocoaHeads. It's kind of just a really old, updated registry somewhere. Yeah, we're fine just to change what we do and kind of do it as we see it.
Okay. So next time I run across the Melbourne CocoaHeads people, I'll just look at them and say, wow, that makes sense. What's a Coco? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, exactly. You can just kind of poke them and yeah. It's probably because in Brisbane, it doesn't have as much weight, but that's okay. It's less explaining now.
And it's the story bridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who doesn't love that?
Okay. Cool. Well, that's how exciting news. We've been kind of hard at work preparing some of this stuff. And, hopefully this is just the beginning of a lot of things to come, and we can, tee up some more cool stuff. And hopefully once the pandemic has passed, we can get back to meeting in person and really start kicking things along. Cool. So we'll hand over to Ryan. Oh gosh, this has gone well. I'm going to stop sharing, make you the host, and then you can share your screen.
Good.
Okay. Zoom, yay. Change host.
Seamless.
Nailed it.
Let me find. This is the one I want. Share. People are going to have to tell me when you can see Keynote. Can you see Keynote?
We can see
black
Keynote.
screen.
See
I see a
Keynote.
black. Oh, I see Keynote with a black screen on it.
Yeah, sorry, it's a trick question. All right, cool. And I presume you can still see a black screen. Very good. Hey, everyone. My name's, as Jaden said, Ryan Hayward. I am what's referred to as a lead consultant, not lead consultant, at Telstra Purple. I'm also one of the fresh co-organisers of the very fancy Brisbane.swift. And like Jaden said, we are basically hitting the reset button on CocoaHeads Brisbane and this meetup in general. So I thought, what better way to do that than to make some very hyperbolic and over-promising claims like, it's never been a better time to be an iOS developer. I've been developing on iOS mostly hobbyistically since 2013, put a few apps on the App Store, all of them wildly successful, which is why I still have my day job. And it certainly seems true to me that I guess the minimum that anyone can ever expect, which is that things get better over time, is certainly the case for iOS development and Apple development in general. Very good. Why am I so happy? Well, SwiftUI is becoming the new norm. And with any luck, the bad parts of UIKit will be long forgotten by WWDC 21. I don't want to say that UIKit is all bad. There's certainly some cool stuff and it served us well for a long time, but there are certainly some prickly bits. Why else am I happy? Well, Xcode has become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, with some pretty sweet integrations with SwiftUI that make building apps fast and also somewhat pleasurable, which is all you can really hope for in life, doing your job and having a little bit of fun. If you're not familiar with SwiftUI, which it seems maybe some people aren't, but also some are, I'll give a little recap on the last year and a bit's worth. But I'm going to start with the old news. So you may be familiar with building apps kind of like this with storyboards. And you may be familiar with this specific situation. I know it's a really outdated screenshot, but it still gets my point across, which is all that I care about. And you may have found yourself in this situation and like many other people, found that storyboards don't quite cut it. They're not a true representation of what you're going to get. They're more of a prototyping tool. So a lot of people actually resign to just writing all of their UI stuff in code and writing significant amounts of Swift or worse Objective-C to do simple things like stick a red square in the middle of their device, which is no fun at all. You may also have tried out the visual format language, which tries to encapsulate some of the layout concerns inside of these really cool magic strings, almost like the bastardization of CSS. And whether or not you're familiar with any of these things is kind of irrelevant because none of these things are SwiftUI, thankfully. Instead, SwiftUI is a radical deviation from the old imperative style of building things. I guess I would describe it as the unified framework for building user interfaces on all of Apple's platforms. So not just iOS, but iPadOS and tvOS. And the aspiration is for it to be the single syntax for everything Apple UI. It's a declarative style syntax where you describe your user interface at a point in time given the application state. But I think it's characterized by more than just that. It's actually not just the code, it's also the experience that you have inside of the Xcode editor that gives you what I would personally consider to be a true WYSIWYG editor experience. And as we sort of touched on earlier in some conversation, if you're familiar with the likes of React for the web, or even if you've done cross-platform native mobile development with the likes of Flutter or React Native, then SwiftUI will feel very familiar to you. But I thought, rather than talk at length about this, I will show you at length. So I'm going to, without making any mistakes at all over the course of the next hour, build a simple app that lets you search for restaurants, get the results in a little list here, see a list of menus available at that restaurant, and if one takes your fancy, you can look at a PDF of that restaurant. Only 3 screens, nice and simple. I think it's achievable in an hour, but I am going to have to cheat just a little bit, so forgive me for that. The API is already built. It's just a single HTTP endpoint, stuck it on an Azure website. It has one endpoint, restaurants, which takes a search term. And if you pass something valid to that, you will get a JSON payload, which has an array of matching restaurants, each of which has an ID, a name, an address, a photo URL, which is what we saw on that first screen, and then an array of menus, of course, each of which having an ID, a name, a description, an icon, because I'm really bad at designing APIs, some availability information, and the URL for the PDF that we will download. I'm going to cheat some more, sorry. The API data types, and actually the code that the URL session code to access the API is already written, just because it's not super exciting writing this stuff in front of an audience. And it's also pretty simple as well, but you can see they're just structs and they conform to Codable, so we can JSON deserialize them. And, oh. It looks like you haven't set up. Go Siri. Best advertisement for Apple stuff. So a couple of UI components will be written already as well, just because it's not the most exciting thing in the world watching someone build these things, but the most complicated UI component I will actually be building. And you'll see that it doesn't really take much more than 5 minutes, hopefully. And I'm going to start now. So I just want to say questions at the end would be ideal because it kind of strapped for time. And don't worry if it's a little bit fast. The code is up on GitHub. And the other thing is this isn't really a deep dive. It's more of like a shallow skim across the surface, about as fast as I can go while trying to explain some things as well. And the main point is to demonstrate SwiftUI's productivity gains that you can have. So fingers crossed for demo time. And I've got this slide here, which I'll refer to for designs. Our designer has told us the app has to look exactly like this. So we will do that. I'm going to jump over to Xcode. Now, like I said, I'm cheating, so I've got a project already set up with some placeholder stuff, but this is basically the result of going File, New Project, waiting patiently, choosing Single View App. Let me know, by the way, if I need to increase font sizes or anything like that. I'll try my best. Let's choose Single View App, stick in your stuff, choose the Swift as the language, and the user interface has to be SwiftUI, and then you get a fresh project and I plug in a whole bunch of code that no one wants to watch me write. So, starting point. It's worth keeping in mind that this is going to change, at least if you're kind of building a fresh 100% SwiftUI app from scratch with Xcode 12. But most of what we'll go through today is still relevant. As usual, we start with the app delegate. We load up our scene. And in scene delegate, we can see what's really happening from a SwiftUI perspective. So the first thing that we actually do is we create a content view. This is the first SwiftUI thing that we actually do. And we stick that in what's called a UI hosting controller, and we shove that on the window as the root view controller. And that's kind of the way that the app bootstraps. So may as well click into content view, and here is where we get our first glimpse at some SwiftUI stuff. If you've never done SwiftUI before, then you'll be delighted to know that this is like the simplest SwiftUI view that you can make. Roughly 8 lines of code. So SwiftUI views are structs and they conform to a view protocol, and the view protocol dictates that you basically have to supply a body, which is basically what gets rendered when the SwiftUI component is going to show up on screen or mounted into the hierarchy. And so I don't have to change any of the boilerplate stuff from app delegate and scene delegate. I've just decided to delegate my content view down to another SwiftUI view called menu demo app root view, which is where I'll start. So Already SwiftUI views 100% code, might look unfamiliar if you're used to UI kit and storyboards and whatnot, but I want to show you the other part of SwiftUI. Like I said, it's not just the code, it's also the Xcode integration. And this idea that you can be building your UI and basically running your app as well and looking at it in a preview over to the side. So it gives us this nice little button to go and generate a preview for the SwiftUI view that we're in. And it basically just generates this stub struct, which conforms to a preview provider protocol here. And we can actually just run this. And the cool thing is that it will also update in real time. Whoa, amazing. So if you're familiar with things like hot module replacement in React, it's not exactly the same as that, but if you're familiar with live reloading in React or modern web frameworks, then that's basically what this is. So whenever you make a change, it will reload your view and show you the goods. Very cool. Now, obviously, previewing just arbitrary text isn't what we want to do. And previews are just 100% code as well. And there's a good reason for that, which will become more obvious as I go through. But rather than previewing text, let's preview our demo app root view. And this is where I guess we could start building things. But you can see that my menu demo app root view, as you can sort of deduce from the body here, is just a to-do view. And if we sneak peek into the to-do view, it's just text and it says comment to do. So that was a nice whirlwind intro to SwiftUI and previews. So let's actually start building a thing now. We may as well start with the first page. What better place? We'll do the search screen. I'll look at what's on there. So there's a navigation bar title, which is something we'll look at a little bit later. There's a search field, which is a component that I've already constructed. And then there's a list of vertically arranged, with a little bit of spacing between them, restaurant cards based on the results of what I searched for. So let's start building that. I am going to pretend, because I like to structure my apps like this in terms of screens, I'm going to pretend that we have a thing called search screen. And I'm just going to invoke it as the body of my menu demo app root view. I'm going to go into my folder structure on the left and just go to search-screen.swift, which I pre-generated. I'm just going to start writing on Swift. Search screen is a view. It has a, whoops, sorry, I always make this mistake. Import SwiftUI. It's a view, and it has a body. And similarly, I probably want to have a preview for this, but for now, let's just go, hey. I'll create a preview, and I'm just going to make our search screen the thing that we're previewing. Just see if it all works. I'm a huge fan of keyboard shortcuts, but there are obviously user interface elements to do all these things. It's just very slow if I push buttons to bring up the preview and to refresh them. So this is looking pretty good so far. The app's pretty much done. There's just a little bit left to do. So that first screen, we can see from the design that it's probably going to be vertically scrolling. So I'll show you a cool feature of SwiftUI, which is this idea of like container views and how simple it is to use something like a scroll view. I'm going to just put some text, hey, inside of a scroll view. And now we can see that my hey text is inside something, but I can't really interact with it. And there's a specific reason that I did this bit first. It's because these static, well, sort of static, but real-time updating previews in SwiftUI is not all that you can do. You can also basically run your app and have a sort of interactive experience inside of Xcode, and it still updates on the fly, which is pretty cool. And already, if you aren't familiar with SwiftUI, if you haven't used it before, but you're used to doing things in the much slower way with Storyboard, like this is what sold me straight away. Maybe I'm just easily impressed, but this is the thing that made me say, finally, iOS development is actually going to be bearable. So that's great, but it's not our app, so let's forge ahead. The first thing that we're going to have in our UI is our search field. And our search field is a pre-baked component that takes a closure for basically what happens when someone commits a search. So for now, I don't actually care. I'm just going to pass an empty closure that does nothing. And we can see over on the side, our live preview is updated with our search field. I have to put in a little fix for some silly stuff that is a bug in SwiftUI and do this. Please just ignore that. But we can see the padding is off a little bit as well. So I've created my view, and then I have called some extension methods basically, or extension functions on that view to modify the view somewhat. And these are referred to as view modifiers. So search field is a view, and apply and padding, it doesn't actually change the struct because structs are immutable, but what it does is it returns a new search field with padding around it. And hopefully the contrast is sufficient where you can actually see that. But if I wanted to, I could make it a bit clearer by setting a background color of red, and then you can see that as I remove padding and stick it back in, the fact that it's got padding becomes more clear. And so views and view modifiers form the bulk of what you do in SwiftUI. And in addition to that, you've got things like state management and some stuff that you can do around animation. But that's like, in a nutshell, it's kind of what you're working with on a regular basis. And that's really cool. I can actually interact with this and type stuff. It's really hard to type. Oh, I don't want to delete it. Don't do that. So now that part of the UI is done, I'll move on to the next bit, which is the results list. So I am going to invoke a view that sort of pre-exists as a to-do item called restaurants list. And you'll see this to-do stuff all over the place as I go through here. And we'll just start building our restaurants list component. Right? So first thing I want to do is create a preview. I'm just going to stick restaurants list. The restaurants list is basically a loop over some data that we have got, and it presents restaurant cards with some spacing between them vertically. And the vertical bit is important. So if you're familiar with some constructs in UIKit, like your vertical stack or your horizontal stack, SwiftUI has got you covered there. So I'm going to create a VStack with some spacing 16 points. And then just for laughs, I'm going to stick some text in here that says, hey, I'm going to do that a couple of times, right? So our container views can actually take, mind the compiler complaining there. Container views can take, I don't want to explain how because it's kind of complicated, but they can take multiple views within them. I forget exactly how many. I think it might be 9 or something like that, although I think they've fixed that from a compiler perspective in SwiftUI 2. And I suppose the next thing to do is to show our restaurant card instead of some text. And we want to do that as many times as we have restaurants to show, right? The only thing is doing that in sort of in this way is obviously not tenable. So it'd be nice if we had a looping construct of some sort, which SwiftUI has for us. So we can use for each, and we'll for each over some imaginary set that I haven't introduced yet called restaurants. And each one is going to be identified by the ID. And given a restaurant in that enumeration, we will present a restaurant card. And this isn't going to compile, obviously, because we don't have a list of restaurants, but this is the first foray into some state management principles in SwiftUI, and it's basically that if the view doesn't own the data, then it should be passed in. And this is something that you should be familiar to if you've worked with the likes of React or anything like that, is moving the state as far up in the hierarchy as you can. So because they're just structs, we can easily just say that our data will just be a list of restaurant data or an array of restaurant data, okay? And now this bit's happy, but the compiler is going to complain in a couple of places here. So the first place that the compiler complains is in our preview. And this is another cool part of SwiftUI previews. It's basically that it's just code that runs. So if I want to pass some restaurants in, I can just come up with some fake restaurants like this. And I'll need to go and tell the parent component here to just take nothing for now because I don't really care. I'll go back to my restaurant list. Rebuild. Works fine every time. And now you can see I've got 3 to-dos, which maps perfectly well with my 3 fake restaurants that I've got in my fake restaurants file. I'll just show you where this is. This is in some preview content folder where I've got fake restaurants, which I can just use for previewing things. You can even stick image assets in here, for example, if I wanted to play around with how things are going to look inside of SwiftUI previews. But for now, I'm pretty happy with this. Sorry, just going to go back. And I suppose what that means is I should probably start building the restaurant card because that's the only thing that's kind of missing right now, right? Hopefully it's easy enough to follow along as I'm just like switching between files. Let me know if it gets a bit difficult, but this is the more complicated UI thing that we're going to build. And then after I've done that, we'll have maybe a 5-minute break. First thing I want to do is create a preview. I'm just going to say it's a restaurant card. And because I know ahead of time that I'm going to need to pass in a restaurant for this, I'm just going to do something like pass in the first fake restaurant, and I'm going to pass in a restaurant data as a property on that struct. I'll go and update my restaurants list to pass in the R from the closure, which is what we're enumerating over in here, and then the compiler is happy again. And I can start constructing this view, right? So for reference, we'll go back to our design. If we look at what this is really a vertically arranged set of some fairly basic pieces of information. There's rounded corners. There's an image in the background. The text is just the name of the restaurant, although the designs make that kind of difficult to see. And then underneath that is the address. And it's kind of maybe a little bit hard to see, but the background for that text is also slightly transparent, right? So not an awful lot of stuff here to do, but the first thing that we did was identify at least that it's vertically laid out. So I'm going to stick a VStack in. And then I'm going to start putting some details together. So I have a restaurant, which is passed into my struct, and I'll just stick the restaurant name. And already on the right, we can see my preview is updating with the name of my first fake restaurant, which is Yum Yum Thud. And underneath that, we want the address. 123 Cool Lane, super simples. And already it's kind of apparent to me at least, maybe just because I'm a bit pedantic, that building this component inside the context of an iOS sort of device, like an iPhone, doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's just kind of jarring looking at this full screen iOS device representation of my preview. And you might be wondering, can I change that? And yes, you can. So our previews, like I said, they're just code, and that gives them all the flexibility that you can get from code. So I will call the preview layout modifier on my restaurant card inside of my preview provider, and I will pass in a fixed width of something like, I don't know, let's say 500 and 300. And now I'm not previewing anymore on an iOS device. I'm just previewing inside of some frame that kind of helps me to visualize how this is going to look in the real world. And that's great, or at least I think it's great. It's significantly nicer for me to work with. So from our designs, we can see that there's supposed to be some empty space above the text. So if you're familiar with doing this in UIKit, it's fairly typical to stick spacer views into your vertical and horizontal stacks, and SwiftUI's got you covered there as well, with literally just a spacer view. And now we can see that the text at the bottom, the text is at the bottom. From the designs, hopefully it's not too jarring switching back and forth, but from the designs we can see that there's padding around that text. So I probably need to introduce a container. I'll just add another VStack in, stick some padding on there, and then mostly it's kind of what we want. So there's padding around the text within this VStack. It's just that the text needs to take up all of the available space, and that's easy to do with the frame modifier. So I'm going to say the max width of this text is infinity, so it takes up all of the available space. And another thing that I control with the frame, or that I can control with the frame, is the alignment. So I'm going to say alignment is leading. And now it looks like the designs is taking up all of the available space and the text alignment is leading. I'll basically just do that on the other one as well. So we're getting pretty close. The other thing that's missing on this, which is going to be kind of hard to see until I do something like background.color.black. Let's not do that. Sorry, I'll can that. The next thing I need to do is stick some background on this container. So let's go background. We'll give it a color. It's actually going to be a system color, just because that's the one that I think looks the best. System gray 6. And it's kind of hard to see because it's so light. But if I kind of change it to like a system gray, it becomes a lot more obvious. The reason I'm using these system gray colors, by the way, is you're probably familiar. it translates nicely into dark mode, right? So the system will choose the corresponding dark mode variant, which is another thing I'll show you a little bit later. But System Gray 6 looks pretty good. And another thing about color is that they are kind of just views as well, so to speak. So I can put modifiers on colors as well. And a modifier I can put on there is opacity. And I can set the opacity of this to something like 0.9. Now, again, it will be hard to see this until I do something like System Gray. And then I modify the opacity just sort of arbitrarily in front of you so you can see that it works. So dealing with colors is also really, really easy in SwiftUI. It's super fun. And that's actually most of the UI that we need to build. There is one little thing left that we need to do. Well, two little things. One is around corners and the other is the background image. I'll do the background image first, just because it's going to make it look really nice. And for preview purposes right now, I'll use a preview asset. So it's just going to be an image. And the name of that image is going to be restaurant photo. And that looks really good, I think, personally. It's probably the best restaurant card I've ever seen in my life. But if we want it to look even better than the best, we can make that image resizable. And then we can even say scale to fit, which doesn't really work, or maybe scale to fill. And then we get this sort of aspect fill effect on our image. And it's just the background of our entire VStack here. If I change the opacity, I can sort of tweak these values in real time and see what works well. Like maybe 0.2 is really good because now I can't read the text and that's a terrible idea. 0.9 seems to work pretty nicely. And that's how easy it is to build those sorts of components. I'm not sure if that was 5 minutes, but I'm just going to quickly smash through some final bits here. Content shape, I have to do this because it fixes a bounding box issue, which is current in this version of SwiftUI. Ignore that. But if I want to get the rounded corners, I can do something as simple as call the clip shape modifier and pass a rounded rectangle view into this with a corner radius of, I don't know, 24 looks pretty good, right? And oh, hello. Corner radius, mate. If you look real closely, you can see rounded corners around our little view here, even at the bottom. The only problem at the moment is that this card is actually taking up all of the available vertical space, which at least our designer doesn't want us to do. The designer specifically wants this to be a 250 point high component. And it becomes obvious when I change the preview layout to have a height of 500 instead of 300 that this is a problem. So again, I'm just going to call the frame modifier on here. And I'm going to say a max width, just take up all the available width. I haven't found a better way to do this particular thing, but I really just want to be able to say the height has to be 250. I know there are reasons for this, especially when it comes to accessibility, but for this demo, I'm going to just say min height is 250 and the max height is 250. And then we've got our component that is pretty much exactly as per the spec from our designer, and it fits within any frame. So if I go and get rid of this here, we can see it in action on an actual iOS device. And that is fairly indicative of how it's going to look. So much so that now if I go back to our restaurants list, bada bing, bada boom, just sort of all happened in the background while I was plugging away in a different view. And that's a fairly rewarding experience. I can even go back a little bit further and see absolutely nothing because this search screen doesn't have anything hooked up to actually generate our restaurants, to go and perform a search and bring back a list of restaurants. But if I really just want to see how it looks on this screen, I can just pass in fake restaurants and hooray, things are kind of looking okay. Similar to our search field though, we've got some padding issues. I'm a fan of putting remedies in for UI concerns in the place that, that they happen. So I will actually fix the padding here rather than inside the component. I'm just going to put some leading and trailing padding on that results list. And then everything just kind of looks nice. Okay, so that I think is probably time for a break. I am next going to go and fill in these gaps, right? So in the place where we have an empty closure which handles the search and I'm passing in fake restaurants, what I would actually like to do is modify some state on the search screen to go and fetch a list of restaurants which match my search query and then present them here. So I think a 5-minute break might be good. All right, I'm going to start again, pick up where we left off because it's about 7:41 and I'm mindful that people have lives outside of me talking, surprisingly. So where we left off was we have this screen that doesn't really do anything. If I run it, then wait very patiently. Let me know if you can't see anymore, by the way. Oh dear, it's very slow, isn't it? Possibly even dead. So let's just open it up and rerun it and then hit the play button again. Yeah, there you go. Nothing happens and that sucks. So let's make some stuff happen. So our search field as like a simplistic model just takes a closure, which is what's going to happen when we commit the search, which in my case is when I hit enter on that text field. So what I want to do is I want to stub out something. It's going to pretend like I've got a function called perform search. I'm going to fill that out. So perform search is going to take some search, which is a string, and it just does something, right? And the thing that it does is going to call get restaurants, which is our API call. I'll show you quickly what it looks like. Construct a URL with some query items. Use URL session.shared.data task. Do some JSON decoding and return the result as a completion handler. Cool. So I'm going to pass search into that. Given results. And now I'm going to handle the results from our API call. Now, someone like me, very simple-minded, if I think about what I want, ideally, as an API for this, I really just want to be able to do something like self.results equals results, right? And I'm going to say that SwiftUI, like spoiler alert, SwiftUI lets you do stuff like this, right? But let's follow the story through a little bit. So in order for that to actually work, we need to have a property on the search screen called results. So let's just make one. It's going to be an array of restaurant data. And it's going to start at an empty array. Cool. If I try to build that though, SwiftUI, the Swift compiler rightly complains at me that it can't assign to property self. Sorry, it can't assign to property because self is immutable. We are in a struct and structs are immutable and it doesn't really make sense to go and change a property on a struct. So SwiftUI does some of the heavy lifting for us here with some state management property wrappers, one of which is called state. And state management is a slightly complicated, but not super duper complicated topic in SwiftUI. But I'm going to show you the simplest way of managing state. In order to make this work, I literally just have to put the decorator or property wrapper called state in front of this, and then it all just like magically works. The one thing that's left to do though is to show the results and pass that through to restaurants list. So I'm going to build that, update my view, close it and reopen it and run it again. I did a couple of dry runs of this where Xcode didn't crash even once and it got my hopes up, but alas. If I go and do a search, just by modifying this state property on the struct, we now actually have a thing that's really working, mostly. I do have a little bit left over from my restaurant card, which I haven't filled in yet, so I'm going to quickly jump into there and do that. Instead of using this image thing, which is a preview image, I'm going to use something that doesn't exist in SwiftUI yet. It's called a remote image. It takes a URL, and it uses a photo URL from the restaurant. Don't worry too much about this. I'm really hopeful if I'm ignorant of whether or not this is the case yet, but I'm really hopeful that Apple comes up with a better way of dealing with remote images, like sourced via a URL from the internet. But for now, I have this very, very complicated looking thing, most of which I sourced from the internet to make remote images kind of just work the way that sort of static images from your asset catalog work. But I'll digress on that and go back to our search screen and do another search. And now we have actual real images being loaded up by the photo URL from the data that's coming back from the API. And all I had to do was use a little callback, a state property wrapper, and assign a value to a property on the struct. That's cool. Nice and simple. No table view delegates or collection view delegates and data sources or anything like that. It's just a slight improvement. I know diffable data sources are a thing now, and it's significantly easier, but it helps bolster my argument for SwiftUI if I can draw undue parallels. So the next thing that we want to do is actually start introducing some of the navigation things. So when I click on one of these, I would like to be taken to the screen for that restaurant. And another thing that's also missing is this title at the top, and they're both related. So what I'll do is I'll start by just adding the title, which is going to appear in a navigation bar at the top. In order for things in SwiftUI to kind of coexist with a navigation hierarchy, you need to wrap them in what's known as a navigation view. Now, typically I wouldn't put this where I'm going to put it in this demo. I would probably put it somewhere like the menu demo app root view, and there are specific reasons for that. Don't really have time to go into it. But for the sake of making the demo easy, I'm just going to put it inside search screen. So I can just put navigation view around this. You'll already see that my preview is accommodating a title that doesn't exist. If I scroll it up, you can actually faintly see that there's a navigation bar appearing at the top, which is where the inline version of that title would go as well. So you might be wondering, where's the title? Well, the thing is that the title goes on the view that's contained inside your navigation view. So it's pretty easy to add that. Just navigation bar title as a view modifier on the scroll view. I know it's a bit weird. It makes more sense if you do things a little bit differently, but for all intents and purposes, the scroll view is the view that is pushed to the top of the stack, and therefore it has this title. And if this didn't crash, I would be able to show you that I can get all of the UIKit goodness associated with that title there, where it kind of just does, you know, the whole large display and then the inline display transition nicely. So the next thing I want to do is actually introduce the ability to click on one of these things and take me somewhere. And I think this is probably a good time to demonstrate another SwiftUI previews feature. As I've been building different views, the preview that's showing is the one for that specific view. So if I go to my search screen, it's showing my search screen preview. If I go to my search field, which doesn't have one, whoops. If I go to my restaurants list, it's showing the restaurants list preview. But sometimes you just want to keep the same preview that you're looking at here open as you modify things elsewhere. And that's easy to do. You just press the pin button down in the bottom left. And now as I start moving around, the search screen, even though it does refresh as I open up files, it's still there. And I can actually still interact with it and do things with it, right? So what I want to do now is introduce the concept in SwiftUI of the navigation links, which is one way of presenting or pushing other views onto the navigation stack. And it's pretty simple. It's just another composable view. But I suppose choosing the right place to do that is pretty important. Personally, I think the right place to do this is inside restaurants list. Restaurant card is kind of a naive presentation only component, so I don't want to put navigation concerns in there. The restaurant list seems like a nice place to go and insert some of these navigation concerns. So all I have to do is wrap my navigation card in a navigation link, which is another sort of container view. One of the parameters for navigation link is a destination, which literally just takes a view. And my destination in this case is just going to be a restaurant screen. Can't type. Which at the moment takes nothing. And the body of this navigation link is kind of like the label that you will tap on in order to make that transition. So if I go and do another search, it's exactly how we want it to look. Hooray! Just kidding. There's some default behavior in SwiftUI with navigation links in this particular context where it shows all of our subviews with an accent, or basically the currently active accent color. You can get around that pretty easily, albeit frustratingly, by going button style, plain button style, nice and intuitive. And then everything kind of looks normal again. And if you notice as I'm clicking on these things, they kind of go a little bit more transparent. That's just the default behavior when you are clicking on a navigation link. It shows that they're actually, in this case, it shows that they're working. So if I click on one of these, whoa, pushes our restaurant screen onto the navigation stack. And we also get our search, our back button, which is just the title of the previous screen. And if we go into restaurant screen here, I'm going to unpin this now because I don't care so much anymore. We can definitely see that indeed this screen hasn't been built yet. So let's do that. But first, let's have a look at what we're supposed to build. Could be a good start. So our restaurant screen has the title, the name of the restaurant, and the list of menus available at that restaurant. Now, we already have the data fetched down from the API. It's a very expensive call that basically just sends everything down, which makes the app run nice and fast. So we will have our title and then a menus list using some pre-baked menu card SwiftUI views that I've prepared earlier. And if you look at it, it's kind of the same as our search view. So a lot of the SwiftUI stuff I'm going to write, it's going to be familiar, right? We've got a vertically arranged, slightly separated list of items that we can click on. So let's go and make that happen. The first thing is it's got to be scrollable. So I'm just going to go scroll view. And let's do something like, let's pretend like we have our menus list already, which we kind of do because I've pre-baked it. We'll create a little preview. And I'll go restaurant screen. I'll load that up. Now we don't actually have anything yet. So let's go and fill in some details because we know we're going to need this. On our restaurant screen, we will have the title and the menus, and we're going to need to have a restaurant for that. So let's pass the restaurant in. Restaurant data. Oops. We'll need to go and fix our restaurants list screen, which uses restaurant screen as a destination. So we should pass in the currently enumerated restaurant from our for each. And we need to update our preview so that it takes something. I'm just going to choose the first fake restaurant. Cool stuff. I think that actually worked. Yep. Very good. Before I move on and start building the menus list, what I want to show you is something that we can do in previews, which I haven't done yet necessarily. So over here on search screen, it was nice and easy for us to see the whole experience inside of the context of a navigation stack with the whole title and whatnot. And I kind of, as I'm building the restaurant screen, I want that same experience, right? So if I was to do something like stick a navigation title on here and the title is the name of the restaurant, I would expect that name to show up at the top. But it doesn't because it's not inside of a navigation hierarchy. The thing is, it doesn't really make sense for me to introduce a navigation hierarchy here because it's actually already nested inside of a navigation hierarchy by virtue of the fact that it's kind of like inside of, it's presented from search screen. But again, previews are just code. So I can actually look at how these things are going to look in different contexts like this. I can just inside my previews go, oh, I want to see what it looks like inside of a navigation view. Or I want to see what it looks like in dark mode or light mode, which is something that I should show as well before we finish up. But I guess the thing to keep in mind, and the reason I'm saying this, is that previews aren't something necessarily that's static. They're there to help you be as productive as possible as you're building up your views. So this idea that you create your previews once and that's what you've got to work with is 100% not the case. They will update with the project as you develop it, and you can just basically stick in whatever previews you like. And to help bolster that that little demonstration, I might quickly jump back and show you another feature of SwiftUI previews, which just kind of admittedly I missed, which is showing multiple of them. So if I go into our restaurant card, right? I'm looking at a single restaurant card, and if I put it back the way it was and I say preview layout with a fixed width of 500 and a height of 250, that's cool. I might be interested in seeing what this looks like in dark mode, like I sort of just said moments ago. And that's pretty easy to do as well. So you can say environment, color scheme, dark, and then it just updates like that. And if I wanted to make changes and I don't know, like let's say, for example, something I missed, which is making this heading bold, it just updates in real time like that. But what if I want to see, which is entirely reasonable, as I'm building this view, what it looks like in both dark mode and light mode? Or maybe I have concerns about accessibility and I want to see what it's going to look like with big text and small text, or any number of other environment factors. It would be nice if I could see multiple at once. So again, on the topic of previews being something that we can just change on an ad hoc basis, we can easily have more than one preview by wrapping our individual previews in a group and saying, here's a dark one and here's a light one. And now every time I want to make changes, I can see what those changes are going to look like on all of the different variations of my view in the various different environmental contexts that we can potentially find ourselves in, right? So there's accessibility, there's dark mode, there's navigation view as well, like I interrupted that demo to show here. So SwiftUI previews are not a static thing, and there's something that are supposed to just really help you as you're iterating on your designs, building your projects. So that was a quick segue. Sorry about that. I did actually miss that bit. So I'm going to go back to our screen that we were building, which is our restaurant screen. And I've just updated the preview so that it's inside the navigation view so that I get our sweet navigation bar title. And now I need to start building the menus list. So I'll go into that, create a preview. I know that we're going to need a restaurant here, so why don't I just do that, or even potentially a list of menus. But I know roughly what it's going to look like. It's going to be another VStack with some 16-point spacing, and we're going to for each over some menus, each identified by the ID. Whoops. Oh, come on, Ryan, you can type. You've done it before. Given M in this enumeration, we will show a menu card, and the menu will be that kind of thing. So this is a pre-built component that I didn't really want to have to go and build in front of everyone. So I'm already sort of out of time. But if I fill in the blanks here and say there's a property called menus, which is an array of menu data, and I update my preview so that the menus is fake restaurant 0.menus. I'll go back to my previous screen and pass in menus is restaurant.menus. Compiler's happy. I'm happy, more or less. And if I reload by closing and opening again, then voila, without any problems or bugs whatsoever, I now get my sweet preview of my menus list. So again, this is a component very similar to, in fact, I could show you the code and just glimpse it to you quickly. It should look very familiar if you sort of photographically memorized the restaurant card code, right? So maybe take about 5 minutes to write that component, but that means that the menus list is done. And if I go back to my restaurant screen, my preview for that using fake restaurant 0 inside a navigation view is also nice and indicative of what I can expect to see when I actually run the app. Again, we've got some padding issues. I like to sort them out where they appear. So I'm just going to say it's got some leading and some trailing padding. And now it's looking pretty cool. There's one thing left to do, at least from the designer's perspective, which is to show the PDF menu itself when they click on one of these things. Sorry, when they tap on one of these things, because they won't be in a simulator using this app. If you look at how this is presented as well, I haven't gone with the navigation stack approach for this. Instead, I'm presenting it modally. The reason I did that, not only because I think it makes the most sense. You're looking at a single menu at a time and you dismiss it once you're done. And that kind of fits in with the human interface guidelines. I think I'm interpreting them correctly. But the other thing is it gives me an opportunity to show you how modals, at least at the moment, work in SwiftUI. But another thing about this is that it's an opportunity to show the UIKit integration. So in PDF Kit, which is an existing framework provided by Apple to deal with PDFs, there's already a view, which is a UIKit view called PDF view. And it can take a document, and that document can be sourced from the internet. And if you remember from our API calls, we actually get the PDF URL. So what I would really love to do is not reinvent the PDF wheel here and just use UIKit's implementation of the PDF view inside of my SwiftUI app. So let's do that. The first thing that I'll do, just because it probably makes for a better demo, is to go and build that PDF view. So I'm going to go up here and go to PDF menu screen. And I've left it kind of half completed like this because I want to demonstrate that it's not your typical SwiftUI view. So at the moment I'm saying that it is a view and it conforms to the view protocol, but because we actually want to use a UIKit view, it's not going to be a view. So I'll just get rid of this. And instead of conforming to the view protocol, it's going to conform to UI view representable. UI view representable in a nutshell is kind of the bridge between SwiftUI and UIKit. And if you think about the life cycle of a SwiftUI view, it will make sense when we start filling in some of these gaps. But basically a SwiftUI view comes into existence. And then as you've seen with state modification and stuff like that, that SwiftUI view, because it's a struct, it will technically just be recreated over and over again. But once it comes into existence, it also accepts updates, right? So it will change its appearance, or it might present new information or something like that. And UI view representable has methods which basically fill in those gaps between the SwiftUI and the UIKit chasm, okay? So the compiler is going to help me. The first thing it's going to make me do is fill in a generic type, which is what the UIKit view is that I would like to come out of this. And I happen to know that this is a PDF view. And that's really cool. Compiler is going to help me again by telling me that PDF menu screen still doesn't conform to the protocol. So I'll just fill in some stubs. And this is where the methods that I was kind of alluding to show up for us, right? So we've got our function which is responsible for making the PDF view. And then the function which is responsible for updating the PDF view based on a SwiftUI update context, okay? Now we don't actually care about the update in this case. So I'm just going to leave that empty and be pedantic about white space. And I'm just going to focus on making the UI view. And that turns out to be remarkably easy. We're going to say let PDF view equals PDF view. We're going to say that the document on this PDF view is a PDF document from a URL. And the URL is going to be from a menu, PDF URL. I'm going to force unwrap that, assuming that it works nicely. We're going to say auto scales equals true so that it shows up fitting to the screen. And we're just going to return the PDF view. Obviously, I need to fill in some blanks here because I don't have menu, so I'll just introduce that. Let menu data. And now it's compiling. I promise. See? But the cool thing is that these actually work with previews. So if I say PDF menu screen inside of our preview, and I provide fake restaurants, come on, Ryan, 0, menus, I don't know, let's just choose the first one. I reload the preview. You can see that we actually have a preview of a PDF view. And if I press the play button, we can do all the cool things eventually, like, wow, zoom in and out, and I don't know, make people nauseous by doing it too quickly. So again, Swift previews pretty much got you covered in the case of UIKit integration as well. And you can see how remarkably easy it was to go and make this UIKit view in a way that's going to work with SwiftUI. And I'll prove to you that it works with SwiftUI by integrating it with the rest of our app. You might be worried about some of the verbosity of this code. The Swift compiler is pretty smart. It does require us to define the type alias, but it only required us to do that because it wasn't as smart as I claim it is. The fact that we are specifying PDF view as the return type of this function and the type of this parameter on this function means that Swift's type inference means that we don't actually need to specify this as the type alias on there. So you can remove one line of code. Efficiency. All right, so let's go back to restaurant screen. I want to figure out how I'm going to present that PDF menu screen. And this is where things are going to get probably the most complicated that they've been so far. And it's only going to get complicated if I try to describe some of the method signatures that are involved in the view modifiers here. And I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to kind of plow through it nice and quick and show you how easy it is if you kind of know what you're doing. But if I think about the state management involved here, on our restaurant screen, you are either looking at one menu or you're not looking at any menus, right? So the first thing I can do is just sort of preemptively introduce some state. I'll just call it var current menu is a menu data, or it's nil. And it's going to start off as nil because when I load it up, I'm not looking at anything. Then what I want to do is I want some way of updating this state. And I'm just going to quickly cheat and create a callback on my menu list or my menus list view. I'll call it something like onSelect. And I'm just going to pass a closure, and I'll fill this in on the actual component in a moment. I'm just going to say given a selected menu in this closure, self.current menu equals selected menu. Okay, I'll go in and fill this in pretty quick. Always do that, C#. So my menus list is now taking a closure, which it can invoke when we select one of these things. Easy enough. I'm just going to wrap menu card in a button, which does an action, and it's going to call self.onSelected with the current menu. And the label is going to be menu card. Again, I'm going to have to call button style plain button style. In order to make this work, I'll also pass in a closure to my preview. OnSelected, do nothing. That's going to fail. OnSelected, made the same mistake. Build that. Let's have a look at the preview for menus list. Let's actually run it and see what happens when we click on these things. So nothing happens when I click on them because our onSelected closure is just an empty one. But you can see when I sort of click on them that they go slightly transparent, which indicates that our button is working. So button is kind of similar to navigation link insofar as it's just another container kind of component that does something and it wraps around other components which you can interact with, right? So I'll go back to restaurant screen. And now we've got some state which we can assume is being updated when I click on these things. It's just that we can't see it. So now I'm going to introduce another view modifier which is called sheet. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of this stuff, but basically one of the overloads for sheet is that it takes an item which it binds to. And it has to be a binding because when you dismiss the sheet, it needs to change the value that it's bound to back to nil so that it updates the state accordingly. In order to pass the binding, we can't just say current menu because that just gives us the nullable menu data type object. There's a special syntax in SwiftUI for passing bindings to state properties, and all you have to do is stick a $sign in front of it, and then it will be happy. Again, state management is a much more complicated topic. It's not super complicated, but it's more complicated than this. And so I recommend doing some reading up on that in your own time to learn a bit more than what I can sort of show here. But nevertheless, I'm binding to the presence of a current menu. And when there is a current menu, the sheet will show. And then when I dismiss it, current menu will be updated to nil. The other parameter for this is content, which is, again, I'm not going to go into the method signatures for this, but it's basically just a function that takes the thing we've bound to and returns, much like our body of our SwiftUI view, some view. So I'm just going to pretend, just call it PDF content. I'm going to make a function, private func PDF content, given a menu, which is of type menu data, returns some view. I'm going to cheat because I'm almost out of time, but I want it to look exactly like the designs, which includes a little navigation bar at the top and our content, which is our PDF in there. So I'm going to plow through this real quick. It's going to have its own navigation stack. It's going to be the PDF menu screen. The menu that we pass through is going to be the menu from this function. The title is going to be a text, which string interpolates the restaurant name, the restaurant that we're currently looking at on this screen. Oh, sorry, we'll call it the menu name, menu.name at restaurant.name. Because if we go to our designs, you can see it says breakfast at Welsh Wolf. Sounds like a delicious place to be. And that is all we need. And also to reload the preview. That is also all we need because Xcode. Hit the play button, push the button. It's amazing. It's huge. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's also very ugly. So I'm just going to change that title type from automatic to inline. And there we go. Nice and easy way of showing a modally presented PDF menu with just a little bit of state management hackery. And it's not really hackery. Like personally, I feel like this API is really nice and intuitive to work with. And again, if you've ever done anything with the likes of React, then the way of managing state and sort of passing closures to subcomponents to modify state should be very natural and intuitive to you. So I think it's pretty nice. And before I finish up and go back to my slides to conclude my prezzo, I just want to make note of something. And that is that this whole time we've been building this app, we haven't actually run it. Or at least we haven't run it on a simulator or on a device or anything like that. We've been sort of iteratively building this thing inside of Xcode, and Xcode's been giving us, aside from the occasional need to restart the preview, some really good, nice feedback on what it is that we're building. But will it actually work on a device? No, it won't. Sorry. Just kidding. It'll work a treat when it loads up. And this is the first time that we're actually running the code on a device at all. So SwiftUI and Xcode's previews and all the cool stuff that happens there gives us a really great way of building apps productively and without an awful lot of frustration, or at least not nearly as much frustration as we might have been used to with the likes of storyboards and UIKit and doing all that stuff in code. So I think SwiftUI is pretty amazeballs. I'm super keen to see how it improves basically with the release of Xcode 12 and the coming years as well. I think it's a good time to be an iOS developer, or at least significantly better. I'll go back to the slides and I'll finish up. Ship it, almost. There's obviously a lot of work left to do to make this app great, but it's only been about an hour and we already have a really good start. Again, I probably went a bit fast on this, but hopefully you got something out of it. The session was primarily about showing off how different it is to use SwiftUI and how easy it is to get started, how fast you can iterate, and how quickly you can have something real that runs on a device. If you're familiar with SwiftUI and you have an idea, definitely don't wait. You could be 80% shippable before breakfast tomorrow. If you're not familiar with SwiftUI yet, no doubt this talk wasn't enough to make you really good at it, but I will give you some learning resources. If I did go too fast, scan this QR code or check out this link to go straight to the GitHub repo and you can check out the code in all its stinky glory. If you do want to learn SwiftUI, here's a curated list of resources that I think are pretty cool. So the WWDC 2020 collection is actually awesome. I really like WWDC 2020. I think it set the bar pretty high for future events and possibly was even better than the previous ones because they had a lot of time to really polish their educational content. I think they did a great job. If you go to developer.apple.com/videos, the format of this page may change, but at the moment, anything under the Build Great Apps in SwiftUI heading is really good. Paul Hudson's Hacking with Swift resources are all amazing. So you can check out hackingwithswift.com and check out the YouTube channel as well. Probably one of my favorite authors on Swift in general education content. There's a designer whose name I will definitely mispronounce named Meng To. They build beautiful apps and they show you how at designcode.io. So there's paid content there, but it's definitely worth having a look at. There's also the Stanford University course, which has been updated to use SwiftUI. You can check out that link there, CS193P, Developing Apps for iOS. But as ever, I personally think the best way to learn anything is to just get in there and start building and tinkering and failing and then eventually succeeding and failing a lot more than you'd succeed, or at least that's my story. So build stuff. Don't wait. Just have a play around and accept that Apple's going to change things as well, probably in the next couple of months. But that's fine. It's only going to get better. All right. That's actually all I got. Thanks so much, everyone, for sparing me your evening. I really hope it was at least somewhat valuable to you. Would really appreciate if everyone leaves feedback. So scan this QR code or just go to this link. It's a very brief type form survey that you can fill out to let me know what you thought. I'm open to positive and critical negative feedback. The only thing I can hope for in life is to just get a little bit better at things, so don't hold back. We're also keen to just sort of know what people are interested in as future topics. So if you want to leave some ideas for future topics at these sorts of events, that would be great. And also if you want to present, or if you have ideas about what sort of things we could do in the future for Brisbane.swift, please let us know. We are 100% keen on getting the community helping to build this, this meetup into something really, really cool. That's all I got. Thank you so much. Stop sharing and I will distribute the slides later so everyone